He only wanted to finish his shift, collect his thoughts, and go home to his daughter, but one silent elevator ride changed everything. In a place where the rich were treated like royalty and workers were practically invisible, one arrogant challenge wasn't just meant to mock him, it was meant to remind him of where they believed he belonged. But what they didn't know was that he carried a past they could never imagine, a mind they could never measure, and a story they would never be ready for. Because on that night, everything they assumed was about to fall apart. Elijah Johnson lived a life far quieter than the brilliance he once carried. To most people who passed him in the hallways of the towering luxury high-rise, he was just the maintenance worker, the man who changed light bulbs, fixed leaking faucets, and walked with a calm silence that made him almost invisible. He didn't complain, he didn't argue, and he never tried to prove himself. His world now revolved around one thing: providing for his 9-year-old daughter, Maya, the only person who reminded him that he was still worth something, even if the world refused to see it. Most nights, Elijah took pride in finishing his shift with dignity, even when people looked past him like he was part of the furniture. He had learned to live with the whispers, the side glances, and the quiet assumptions that came with his job and his skin. It wasn't new, it was just life. But deep inside, there was a quiet storm he never allowed to break. A memory he had buried so deeply it almost felt like it belonged to someone else. The building he worked in was a symbol of wealth, power, and people who believed they were born to win. Every floor carried ambition, every office smelled like money, and every resident walked as if the world owed them respect. Elijah didn't envy them, he simply wanted to survive among them. Yet, on the 55th floor, where access was restricted to only the most important, something unexpected waited for him, something far more dangerous than a broken lock or a spill on the floor. Because while Elijah had accepted a life of quiet shadows, fate had other plans. Tonight, his past would not stay hidden, and someone upstairs was about to discover a truth they were never prepared to face. Elijah scanned his checklist, expecting nothing unusual. As he stepped into the private elevator that led to the executive lounge, a space meant only for CEOs, investors, and people whose signatures could move millions with a single stroke. He didn't belong there, not in the eyes of the building's elite, but a service request had been logged, and his job required completion before the night shift ended. He kept his gaze lowered, his posture respectful, his presence small, the way life had taught him to be. But this time, the doors didn't open to emptiness. They opened to her. Vivian Albright, the untouchable CEO whose name was spoken in awe and fear, sat alone at a handcrafted mahogany table, her eyes locked not on him, but on a chessboard arranged like a battlefield. She glanced up with irritation, not because she was interrupted, but because he was the interruption. Elijah had seen that look before. It carried the sharpness of judgment and the quiet sting of superiority. She gave a cold nod, one that felt less like permission and more like tolerance, as if his existence were a temporary inconvenience. He worked quickly, avoiding unnecessary movement, but he couldn't help noticing the pieces on her board. They weren't placed randomly, they were mid-strategy, mid-war, positioned with the same precision he once used when he competed under bright stage lights, with cameras rolling and crowds roaring. His eyes lingered for half a second too long, and she caught it. "Do you even know what you're looking at?" she asked. Her tone dipped in condescension rather than curiosity. Elijah didn't respond. Silence was safer. Yet something inside him stirred, a memory he had suffocated for years. She continued, "This isn't a game for everyone. It requires intelligence, strategy, discipline, not just physical labor." Her words landed like a slap he wasn't allowed to acknowledge. Still, she wasn't finished. Vivian leaned back, studying him the way someone studies a misplaced object, curious, unbelieving, almost amused. Then, with a slow smirk, she tapped a pawn and said the words that would ignite everything. "If you think you understand it, why don't you sit?" Elijah froze. This wasn't an offer. It was a test he hadn't agreed to. He shook his head politely, but she pressed on, louder now, almost entertained by her own cruelty. "Oh, I see. Afraid to embarrass yourself?" A few executives who had entered the lounge paused nearby, sensing drama, whispering behind polished glasses as their eyes traced Elijah from head to toe. One part curiosity, one part prejudice, all parts judgment. The air felt heavier. His heartbeat quickened. His past clawed at him, refusing to stay buried. Then Vivian added the final spark, one designed not to challenge but to humiliate. "Fine, let's make it interesting. Beat me in one game of chess and I'll marry you right here. Lose and you apologize for wasting my time and learn your place." The room fell silent. Everyone stared. Elijah lifted his eyes and something inside him shifted. This was no longer about chess. It was about worth. And he could not walk away. Elijah slowly lowered himself into the velvet chair across from Vivian as the room hushed into an almost sacred silence. The chessboard between them felt less like a game table and more like a trial, a place where judgment was already whispered, sealed, and signed before the first move was made. Vivian moved first, her fingers gliding with practiced confidence, a queen in her own kingdom. She played to win, but more importantly, she played to belittle. The executive stood nearby, arms crossed, waiting to witness the humiliation they expected, the humiliation they believed belonged to him. With every calculated move Elijah made, the whispers behind him grew sharper, uglier, tipped with coded words they believed he couldn't hear. "They only hire people like him for labor, not intelligence. It's just a game. He'll crack. He should have known better than to try." Their voices weren't loud, but prejudice rarely needed volume. It survived on smug certainty. Vivian leaned forward as her knight trapped one of Elijah's key pieces. She smiled, not with joy, but with dominance. "Check," she whispered, letting the word hang like smoke in the air. For a moment, Elijah's breath trembled not from fear of losing, but from the familiar sting of being reduced to nothing no matter how hard he tried, how much he knew, or who he used to be. But then, something changed. Elijah's hand hovered over the pieces not with doubt but recognition. The board before him wasn't new. It was a strategy he had once studied, mastered, and defeated on the world stage. Piece by piece, he began to dismantle her confidence. Every countermove was sharper, faster, more intentional. The executive's laughter slowly faded into a stunned silence. Vivian's smirk thinned, her eyes narrowing with growing disbelief. She moved her queen aggressively, trying to force control. But Elijah didn't flinch. He saw the pattern, the same mistake an international champion once made against him. He lifted his rook, placed it gently, and leaned back. "Check," he said softly. Vivian blinked, stunned, her confidence fracturing into panic. She studied the board with rapid, desperate eyes, but the path was already sealed. Elijah shifted one final piece, a quiet, almost delicate movement, and the room felt like it exhaled in shock all at once. Checkmate. Chairs stiffened, glasses trembled. No one dared to speak. Vivian didn't lose just a game, she lost the reality she believed could never be challenged. And before anyone could process it, Elijah stood. Because the real shock hadn't even begun. Vivian's pride shattered long before her voice could form a single excuse. But Elijah didn't stay to hear it. He didn't need validation, applause, or recognition. He walked away not as a janitor who got lucky, but as a man who finally remembered who he was and who he had always been, even when the world tried to bury it beneath uniforms, silence, and prejudice. When he stepped back into the elevator, his hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of years he spent shrinking just to survive. Words spread throughout the building within hours, but it wasn't the victory that echoed, it was the discomfort. People who never looked him in the eyes suddenly tried to speak to him, but he no longer needed their sudden respect. Vivian withdrew for days, not because she lost a game, but because she was forced to confront a truth money had always protected her from. Arrogance is loud, but ignorance is louder, and both collapse when faced with undeniable truth. Elijah didn't demand consequences, but change began anyway. The company quietly established new anti-bias training. Hiring practices were reviewed, and for the first time, employees who looked like Elijah were invited into rooms previously reserved only for privilege. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough. But it was a start, a ripple born from a silent man who refused to break. And as for Elijah, he went home that night, kissed his daughter's forehead, and whispered something he hadn't said in years. Daddy is still someone. Because this story was never about chess. It was about how quickly people decide who matters, and how dangerously wrong they can be. So ask yourself, how many brilliant minds has the world already erased simply because of the skin they came wrapped in? And when the next Elijah walks in, will you see him or look away like everyone else?